Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. This is Andy Littleton from Mission Church in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm sitting with Eric Deepen from the Village and his Brugger's Cup. So, Eric, how are you today?
I'm doing okay. I got to the church and was happy that there were no leaks.
Yes, it's a rainy day here in Tucson.
That's always is my house leaking? Is the church leaking? These are my two main.
We're not leaking. We're okay.
Yeah. So
Good
life
deal.
is good. Yeah.
Well, this is the day after Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and so we have a few things we unpacked.
Yes.
Including a podcast that Eric shared with me from the Liturgist with Andre Henry in it about being anti-racist. Reflections on the day yesterday, our how we responded, and then we especially, I think that the end of the podcast is the best.
Yes.
Not that any of it isn't any good, but hang in there because I think we really got onto something that we'll probably follow up on in the next sometime.
Yeah.
In the near future. So
I think you often say that at the beginning is like, hang on there because it gets good, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. I would say that this time.
you actually agree with me this time.
Really, there are moments where you might be thinking, where's Andy and Eric going with all this? They don't seem sure about themselves. Follow us,
and we're not,
along the journey, because I think we end up in a really good place that will make you think and at least kind of give you a place to start that process. You got it? There's garbage right there. You can shoot it in there. Use your old basketball skills. Yeah, well,
off the rim.
It's been a while, apparently.
Since Thursday.
Since Thursday? Did you play some basketball Thursday?
I did.
That's good. Hi.
All right. Hey. Well, here we are, settling in. You're trying to figure out your church giving situation. Thanks for making me some coffee.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And, yeah, you sent me a couple of weeks ago, I guess, in preparation for this week, I was thinking, a Liturgist podcast. So we haven't mentioned the Liturgist on here.
We have mentioned the Liturgist.
Well, we have. It's been a while.
A very long time.
And so anyway, that's I think we both said that people in our church, this is a podcast that probably gets picked up and listened to in our world, in our community. And yeah, recently they had a guy on there, used to work for Relevant Magazine, among other things, Andre Henry, who was specifically talking about being anti-racist, specifically. And then in our world, we'll see when this actually releases, but this is the day after Martin Luther King Jr. Day, here in a rainy Tucson day. And, I don't know about you, but I was paying a lot of attention to this Richmond rally throughout the day, just hoping nothing went bad, really, really bad. So, I don't know, man. That's what's on my mind.
Yeah.
What's
to
on
go
your
backwards, I gave the Richmond rally little or no thought.
Little to no thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I knew about it.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was going to be that violent.
Yeah.
Or violent at all. And just...
I'm glad you felt that way. I wasn't so sure.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily think it would get violent, but I saw potential for it to go bad. I was hoping it wouldn't. Yeah. And I think it made me think throughout the day. I just thought, yeah, man, what? Why was this on Martin Luther King Jr. Day?
That was a little annoying. Just a little.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed to be the wrong focus.
Well, it seemed to be for a reason. Like they're supposed to, I don't know. Like you're going to say, oh, this is just about guns, but why do it on that day if you don't have some kind of...
Well, maybe, I mean, if we were to just think about it from a logistics perspective, it could have been it was the closest day off they had.
No, these people are putting way more thought into this. Come on.
Get together. Hey, there's that Monday off, so let's do our rally then.
I mean, this is the day where peaceful protest is celebrated.
There seems to be an inappropriate message there. I don't know.
I didn't I didn't tune in enough. All I tuned into was to see if anything had gone wrong. I had a news article that had a refresh button that I just hit refresh and I would see peaceful, and I went, okay, I'm glad for that. Well, it very much, it came off racist because
I would agree.
Yeah, of that choice. It felt deliberate and without polling anybody, talking to anybody, just my gut sense, which, if we take what Andre Henry is saying seriously, then it wasn't just racist. A lot more is racist, and that was maybe a very stark manifestation of it, actually. But
sure,
it didn't sit well with me. I'll tell you. I thought if I were in the African American community, I'd read that loud and clear. I'm reading it as a white guy. If I were in that community, I'd read that loud and clear as not only a statement about guns, but a statement about me and my people, my holiday. A day that not that I'm just celebrating like yay, fun, great, but a major loss.
Yeah.
In our community. And why are you going to bring out your big military assault rifles on that day? What's up with that?
Yeah, that didn't
seems directly agitating.
Yeah.
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 Now, and I'm sure if you talk to somebody on the other side, they'd point to all sorts of agitating stuff on that, but I'm saying it. Yeah, it wasn't. It was insensitive at the least, and very inwardly violent at the most.
Yeah, it was definitely not a good thing. I wonder though, when you think about MLK Day, I mean, honest confession, I was wiped out.
Yeah,
had a long weekend, and it was just another day off.
Yeah.
Same way I reflect on the President's Days,
right,
or Memorial Day,
right. Yeah, you're not.
I'm not good at these holidays, and I'm not saying that I shouldn't like, and that's okay. I just don't know what that looks like.
I had some of that too. I had a couple of thoughts of like, there's the march in Tucson, and
sure.
I thought, actually, more it was in retrospect. I went, should I have gone to that? Should I have been at that? But I also was kind of just thankful to have a day off. But that it didn't feel. It's like, what does this have to do with the intent of this day? Nothing. Yeah,
it'd be interesting. I mean, I think, and this will never happen, but I wonder if MLK Day should be for at least the people in power, white people, you and me, should be a day of mourning. Like for what
would that look?
What we have participated in, but also just historically what our country has done to the African American community. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what would, because you think about Hebrews, they know what a national day of mourning looks like, right? It's usually over your sin, and there's this sitting in ashcloth and whatever ashcloth, yes,
sackcloth and ashes. Sackcloth. You put it together as ashcloth.
I did ashcloth. That's my new theological term.
You done
ashcloth.
Wow.
We need to have an ashcloth day. Yes, thank you for that correction of putting those two words back in their appropriate places. Cloth and ashes, don't.
So we've talked about this before, but did you do? I think I know the answer. Did you address MLK Day at church, or did you post anything about it?
No, I did not.
Yeah, neither did we.
And I think
neither did I. I'll speak for myself.
Yeah, and that's hard for me.
Do you struggle? I struggled with it. I thought about it Sunday. I thought about it yesterday. And what's hard is it feels like, in a way, it's like, what business do I have making all of a sudden one day making this my little thing? Like, it feels like it's way too big and way too serious. And I just kind of get paralyzed. But then I feel like I'm neglecting it by not doing anything.
Right.
And then it's like, what is that? Is that white fragility? Is that what oh, poor me, I don't know what to do with MLK Day.
Are you what Martin Luther King was upset with the moderate white person?
Sure.
And prefers order over.
Yes. Yeah. And so does that mean I should have posted a quote? Why didn't you?
Honestly, because it's not part of the community I'm in, and this is actually, I would be more inclined to post things that have to do with Hispanic liberation, would have to do with, that part of the community and its plight than I would be to do with African American community, because I'm just less connected to that community. That is, it's right. I'm just saying that's the reality of things. Though that's interesting. It does come home to us. I wrote a check to a couple in our church who was going to cook, and they needed, often, you don't have $100 and some odd laying around to cook, so we write it beforehand, and they went to cash it. Now they're African American. Everything was okay on the check. They've cashed village checks at this Walmart all the time.
Yeah.
But when I had tore the check out, I was in a hurry, and so it ripped a little bit of the top. Didn't take any information off it, just ripped it a little bit. They refused to cash it, and it was very obvious to the people who were going to get it cashed that it had a lot to do with the way they looked. Right. Just, you have the ripped check, you have two African American people with their kids in the middle of the day trying to cash a check from this church. This doesn't seem right.
So why didn't you post about it? Yeah,
it's a good question. Well, because I don't think they would want me to.
Right. I'm not. That's not a critical ask. I'm curious about this for myself.
Well, and I don't, because I think partly I'm on a journey and as to understand what it means to be an advocate and what my place is in all of this, in my position. And I feel like there are so many touch points as a white male, and is like there are touch points for women when I'm in a room. How do I interact? Do I dominate the room, or do I allow them to have a voice? Like, then it's, people of different race, different color, right? So Hispanic and African American, they experience the room differently and the world differently. How do I advocate for them? Like I'm like, oh boy, like I have all this responsibility, it feels like, and I don't necessarily know what to do with it. And I don't want to be like the guy who knows everything and how to do it. So I've been trying more to listen and hear what other people want me to do. And what I'm learning is that people come at these things very differently and experience them very differently.
So where did that story end up? Like, how did
they eventually found a place to cash the check? But it was hard for them, and they got frustrated, and they got a little mad at me for tearing the check, which is fine because they should have. It was, and I was kind of frustrated with it too. I'm like, really, I was very busy, but I think if I hadn't been busy, like meetings that I couldn't just say, hey, I can't go to this meeting, I may have gone down to the Walmart or whatever and been like, what the heck, why would you do this? This is not right. But they found a Walmart where people knew them and they cashed a check. It's like, okay. So it's just frustrating. Those things are. I don't know. I think what I have found is even in the community, it's different, minority communities. As you talk to individuals, they aren't even in touch with everything, but you have to ask some questions and get them to think about it, because a lot of times people are in just survival mode.
Sure.
And you live with the environment that you have, and we live in such a fast world that protests can happen like that, and protests can stop like that, and we have all of this. Like in Martin Luther King's day, that took a lot of organizing to
Absolutely.
This is not not that other events don't now, but really you can use Twitter and you can use Facebook and you can use all these different modes to get people to places very quickly, or to have a dialogue very quickly.
Have a dialogue very like Andre Henry.
Good or bad.
Andre Henry in that podcast, was talking about some of the things he'd shared on Twitter and the feedback he got. And sheesh, just lightning fast, right? You put your opinion out, somebody shares theirs. It's a different ballgame than putting in months of organization to make a very public statement. I mean, King did interviews, but it just wasn't as fast.
Well, you had to use TV.
You had to use TV.
Yeah, and radio. Those were your two modes, and those are all based on times. Like this thing goes. It's not on a.
And somebody couldn't immediately get their response to you.
Right.
Delivered in 5 seconds or less. Right.
So let me ask like a more important question. I think all of this MLK Day, the wall. What we do with citizenship in our country and immigration, how the economics of our country work. These are things that the gospel has things to say to.
Sure.
You and I are in unique places because we're white men, so we do have some privilege that other people don't have to talk about it. We're also pastors, which puts us in front of people, and people want to listen to us to say stuff. So how do you, what do you think the gospel says? And I know you probably don't have this all like worked out, but I'd love to hear you work it out with you. It's like, how do we approach these things? How do we talk about them in such a complex world where unity of the faith is something we're called to nurture as leaders?
Right. One of the interesting things I think that came through, I listened to a bulk of that podcast with Andre Henry. I did not listen to all of it. I was listening during some stuff yesterday. My daughter came home and I didn't finish. But one of the interesting things that he stated from his experience was that he was seminary trained, would have a lot of conversations with people in leadership and whatnot. And one of the he would always hear that the race issue wasn't a top priority, that it was somehow down several notches from the gospel.
Right. It wasn't something Jesus was really focused on.
Or that we should be focused on.
That we should be focused on, yeah.
So he would hear that a lot. And then he also just noted that if he wanted to read, say, an African-American, like a James Cone, theologian, that was contextual theology as opposed to just theology. And the one difference between, himself, between Cone and the other theologians was Cone is black.
Right.
And so all of a sudden his is contextual, and he was just begging the question, like, why is that? Like, why is when a black man reads and writes theology, it's contextual, and when a white man reads and writes theology, it's just theology.
Right. Well, let's pause there for a second, because I was thinking he does reference, I think, Jonathan Edwards, who had slaves, in that podcast.
I think so.
But that is an interesting thing if you are an African-American person sitting in a theology class having to study Jonathan Edwards, who justified his possession of slaves.
Right.
That and we don't, as the community in power, think about how that might be infecting you. It's just the class we're offering, and that's what you know.
Right, because he was a great thinker.
Right.
And he was a great thinker.
He was a great thinker.
And so I don't want to...
He didn't think great on that.
But that doesn't mean he was... Yeah, right. He was correct. He made all the right conclusions. Or he made some severely wrong conclusions. And so I think that part of, what I walked away from the podcast gathering and is very true, is that for Christianity to grow and flourish, we must be listening to people in these other contexts and see how it reads and how they interpret it. And that's not to say that you were talking about people who are just struggling to survive. Like, let's be honest, that's not everybody in the racial minority. I mean, this dude's way more educated than me.
Oh yeah, he can
far beyond myself. And so he's not coming at it from a less informed point of view, because he's black.
More informed.
It's an extremely more informed point of view. And so, but we do need, we're reading it through our lens. We need to be hearing it read through other lenses.
Sure.
And so I think that's a key element in all of this. that I walked away hearing that and going, yeah, that should be so obvious. But then that doesn't always lead to the exact conclusions you think, because, I mean, for example, in we were saying we're going to talk about the Methodist sexuality decision.
Oh yeah.
All of a sudden in the United Methodist Church, it's the African church is conservative.
Right.
And all of a sudden, people here who would champion, MLK Day and a whole lot of other things are like, oh, this isn't right. This is bigoted. Like, why can't you listen to the Africans if they tell you you're not following the word?
Right.
Like on sexuality or on, how you treat people of another race, or on what it meant when Jesus said X, Y, or Z. That it's very complicated. I think it's hard to do.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I'm saying it should be done. I was convicted hearing this. I'm stumbling all over my words trying to figure out how to say it, but it's going to take some work and it needs to happen. And I am probably guilty of laziness in this department, of not putting in as much work as I should.
Yeah. I agree. And I think it's interesting. The hard part about a lot of this is, from like a Hispanic point of view, or in our country, they never were slaves. Now, we took land that was theirs. There's a lot of issues going on, right? But with African American community, what's unique to that, and why a lot of times the conversation revolves around white and black and excludes other racial people from the conversation, is because of the slavery in particular, and when in your country you purchased people, justified it through scripture, and used them for your own economic gain. Mm-hmm. Then you freed them. That's gonna have like generations and generations of bad impact.
Oh yeah, and you freed them, sort of. Yeah. Yeah,
I don't mean freed. You just don't buy and sell them.
No.
In a practical sense, you probably are still doing that at some level. So that has to be. I don't think our country's ever truly mourned that in a way.
No.
We've tried at some level to celebrate the victories of liberation, but not the just desolation of slavery and what it's done.
How much damage it did.
Yeah.
And is continuing to do.
Well, and I think it's interesting, in a capitalist society, we start talking about reparations, right? Like, well, how do we pay back all these people, and how do we do that? And that's interesting to me. I'm like, wow, that would be pretty cool. But I don't know what that looks like. But we moved to that really quickly, and instead of like, wow, this was just really crappy, and I'm really sad this happened, and I hope that my children will never participate in that and be part of something bigger and better. And I don't know how that looks, but I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. I think sometimes I just feel overwhelmed by it and tired as an individual. I was thinking about that on the way to this podcast. I was like, well, like, what would get me to be out there on the streets? What would get me to be doing something beyond what I'm doing? And I'm like, well, I'm doing as much as I possibly can.
And I could imagine an African-American family who deals with not having their checks cashed and being pulled over more than they should and have dealt with this their whole life could hear you and go, gosh, Eric, I'm sorry you're tired. Or they could hear you and go, excuse me?
Yeah. Oh, no, I think they could say so. Yeah, I'm not saying my tiredness is justification. I'm just saying, wow, that's where my immediate reaction to this. And I think some of it is because I am bombarded, and all of us are, by all the things that I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to take care of the earth. And there are all these things that consumerism does to destroy the earth, and I need to figure out how to undo those. Okay, that takes a certain amount of mind energy. Then there's just the plight of inequalities of all these different groups that I participate in either promoting or helping undo. That takes a certain amount of energy, right? Then there's the entire mental health of our world that I participate in trying to help be part of undoing.
And there's the opioid epidemic.
Then there's the opioid epidemic. There's the fact. There's the want, like the capitalism in its extreme doesn't line up with the gospel. Now I need to deal with that. And there's a lot. And and it's bombarded me, and it's telling me that these are the things I'm supposed to do, and I'm like, okay, that's a lot, And so, how do I start? You got to pick one. One of them has to be important to you, and then you just have to say, I don't know. You work on that one, and you try to honor and support the people who are working on the others. That's kind of where I am in all of this, and lend my voice where I can.
Which one are you closest to choosing?
Well, I think the one I'm closest to choosing kind of puts me in all of them at times is the mental health of people, where they are. And I think my care for people spiritually makes me have to stand in all of these circles and have something to say about it.
Sure.
Right? Which means that then my behavior is looked at. How
are you doing with that?
I don't know.
How's your behavior?
it's oh gosh. And I did appreciate, you didn't listen to the whole podcast, but at the end he did say something fascinating. He said, just because somebody is, he was talking about talking to people and trying to hear their experience, but he said just because somebody has a lot of melatonin in their skin doesn't mean that you should do what they say.
Right.
Which I thought was a really interesting thing to say. But he's saying is just because somebody is, black or is Hispanic or they're not the end all on the experience and how you as a white person should approach anti-racism. You actually have to choose the voices that you're going to listen to.
Well, yeah, because you're going to find Vodi Bachum's hanging out with John MacArthur saying what he says, right?
Right.
So that's going to be very different than what Andre Henry's saying, which is going to be very different from, what. It's, and I think that that's a hard thing. Is we want to like find the voice of the other,
right?
That says what we're hoping they'll say.
Yeah.
Right. Which says you're doing fine, actually.
Yeah.
And so we find that and we go, oh, look, see? And that's really easy to do.
It is.
Really, really easy to do.
My wife said something interesting. We were chatting about life. It had nothing to do with these things, but I think it applies. She was talking about how one of the things that my mom had taught her when she was younger was how to sit in uncomfortability. So like that was a high value to other people's uncomfortability and your own, to not rush out of it. Yeah. And I think that that's part of the thing that I have to offer to the whole thing is put myself in as many places where I'm going to be uncomfortable and listen, sit with a person who is adamant gun, control person, doesn't want anyone to have guns, and sit there and be uncomfortable with them, because I know that some other friends and other people in my community are just super pro-gun and have a very strong political view of that, and not try to force a certain idea to come forward, but to listen and to help them think about it and try to help them think about what it would look like to sit with somebody who completely disagrees with them and love them and find some value in what each has to offer. It's a big deal. Being uncomfortable is a huge part of this process, I think.
It seems like what we're particularly bad at as a culture. I mean, we can find the people saying what we want to say or what we are hoping they'll say about us. We can find them and we can be with them and dialogue with them. Especially when there's distance, we can dialogue with the people that we disagree with wholeheartedly. We can tweet back or we can protest and yell. There's distance. You're not uncomfortable together. You've usually got your group or your sign or something that you're behind. But it feels like we are very bad at being with and choosing to be made uncomfortable or experience our discomfort or whatever it is in a way that could hurt.
Right.
That seems like, that sounds horrible.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't want to. There was a guy that came through. I don't know if we talked about it on here, but unfortunately I forgot his name. But he came through and spoke here at the U of A. African American guy talking about the race issues, and he ended up kind of landing on we really need to become active listeners to one another.
Yes.
And there was a group of African American students who I was a part of an interaction with who were very upset that was the solution, because it was like, why should I listen? They were kind of saying, why should I listen to more white people? Like, that's,
well, not
enough
actually,
of that. Like,
I'd actually agree with them.
Well,
why should you?
Yeah, I don't know. Why should you? Like, this guy was saying you should. And he was suggesting that both sides needed to really like sit and hear each other, which is sort of what you're saying, I thought.
Yeah, I am saying that. I think maybe because I walk in the world of white people.
Right.
I think when it comes to the racial thing, I think more my call is to say, look, we all have to be uncomfortable. It's not their job to be uncomfortable anymore.
Yeah.
It's our job. I agree, though, I was saying that in most issues, I think the call, and I think God is also inviting, the African American, the Hispanic, the Asian communities to also sit and listen, even though they have suffered. It's just not my role to tell them that.
Okay.
That has to happen within their community.
Yeah.
I'm okay with another African American person sitting in that community and saying, hey, we got to listen. It's not right for me to go in and say, hey, you guys need to listen.
Right. That's what becomes really hard to hear. I agree with you in that regard. And unless you happen to have the relational,
right? Unless they're willing to sit and listen to you say that.
If you're the one that they want, they're asking, or know. But yeah, there does seem to be kind of what Andre Henry was saying was just, it's always the answer, and the fix is always coming from the white community.
Yes.
And that is racism.
Yes.
It's still one group is dominant, telling me how I should respond, how I should feel. And in that, that made sense. Not that I need to give my check of approval. I know that. I'm just saying I heard that and thought, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I think what makes me sad is it feels like the deepest relationships really are a two-way street, and it makes me feel sad to think that just, it feels when I hear that stuff like we just can't have those relationships.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that you and I can have relationship, like I can have a relationship of an Asian woman, or I can have a relationship with an African American man on a one-to-one level, and he can sit and listen to me and I can listen to him. I think a lot of times those issues are more societal. As a group, it might be more difficult for us as Anglo-Americans to sit with African Americans in the same way as maybe we might sit individually with them.
Yeah.
Because I think there is a lot of listening and engagement on one-on-one level, but there is so much systemic cultural things built in. Like we were just started the podcast with what struck me is I did watch some pictures or saw some of the video from the protest. There was the only people who were African American there were the reporters. There was an African American reporter.
There was a big deal in one of the news stories about like one African American couple that was there for gun rights, but it was like the one, right?
Right. It's not. So so when you do that, you're making a cultural statement. Even let's pretend, which is probably completely untrue, that it wasn't motivated. Like, it's still systemic within the culture. You're making a statement that's inappropriate. Like you are asserting your power on the one day that the African American community has an opportunity to thank God for their freedom and for a man who actually helped. Like this. That's
what bothered me the most was, I think a gun rally is worrisome to me just because I'm uncomfortable with guns.
Yes.
Like I don't love the idea. Like if I saw somebody with an assault rifle walking down the street, especially a white guy, I'm like, duck and cover, right? Like I'm not into it.
Especially in our cultural or present day and what that means.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I witnessed, my grandfather take shots at people in his yard. So back when I was a child, I also felt uncomfortable with that.
Sure.
It's not just now. But yeah, it's heightened, right? Yeah, but it was the day.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's frustrating to me is I do believe that more than ever racial reconciliation, which he was a little bit against, and not against reconciliation per se, but just what it does, like
the idea of like, let's just get along on white people's terms.
Yeah, on white people's terms. Yeah. But I mean, I think that lots of interactions that are good are happening between, the different races in the United States on an individual level. But culturally, we have refused to collectively, I think even as a church, address some of the systemic things that we should be standing together in. Even if it's just in, yes, I agree with that and think that this is the direction we need to move, or yes, this is something that's wrong and we need to figure out how to address it.
Right.
Instead of, trying to come up with random statistics to say, oh, this is just how it all is, blah, 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 justifying all the systemic things that are just wrong.
Right.
But I don't think people understand all of the power that we have as white people. They just don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to them.
I personally, and I'm sure people have a different opinion of this, but I was encouraged last year by the Gospel Coalition's putting on a conference, on over the, the MLK weekend, and primarily, I believe, was African American speakers, and I thought that was a really good move for a broader body of the church to just educate and teach, and especially utilizing African American leaders to do so. Personally, I was encouraged by that.
So let me
ask
you this question.
You don't look so sure.
No, I think it was great. I think it was good. I'm just interested. It just made me think about the interview, and when he was at Relevant, he was in charge. Andre, the guy who was on the podcast, is in charge of all of their content. Right, and so he was explaining the different kinds of content that come with the different months and kind of movements.
Yeah,
and then he gets to February, and he wants to do things that are more geared toward African Americans.
Yeah,
because that's what February is in our culture,
right?
Or at least in his mind, and that just gets totally poo-pooed and really starts the movement that he's now part of in a sense, and because he writes this piece that kind of goes viral. But what I thought about that when I was listening is I thought, this has to do with money. I mean, obviously that has to do a little bit with race, but I think this has a lot to do with money. He's like the owner of the magazine, or the CEO is like, this is not going to sell magazines.
It's not going to work.
Right. So we're not gonna take a hit to make a message, to actually say something. Like, money comes over what is right. And that's what I was thinking, is that so often white people who well, I'm not racist, I'm not this. Well, yeah, but you're not willing to risk your money. You're not really willing to risk comfortability.
Right.
And that's the thing that I think so often is the thing that kicks me, is that, am I even willing to risk my own uncomfortability?
Right.
To say something.
Yeah, if your magazine wouldn't sell, or would you do it?
That's my thought. That's what it hit me. I don't know if that's true. It just was like, this seems to be a lot about
I'm sure it's multifaceted. But I think we do lose money for things we really believe in. Like,
yes.
Why do you go on vacation? You're losing a lot of money. You believe in it. You like it. It is valuable to you.
Well, you're talking to the wrong person. I have to be forced to spend money on vacation.
I'm just saying.
But I agree with you.
Yeah. Oh, look at this audio studio, Eric. Sure. You justified the expense of all this money, didn't you? Because you love it. You like technology and audio, and you buy gadgets all the time. So like that's the thing. Like losing money when it's for something we believe in, we're in.
Yes.
And so I think I would say that the money thing is not the lower layer of it.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. So you didn't quite answer my question. And you actually said on the podcast last week when I think I brought this up about just what does cultural engagement look like? Uh-huh. Because we as followers of Jesus, particularly in the 21st century, find ourselves in a unique setting in America when we're, say, looking at Paul and Jesus and their political action as they were being dominated by Rome, and in Jesus even and more in particular being dominated by the religious sect that was controlling things under Rome. So their political actions look a little different than our political actions because theoretically we've been given some form of power because we have a vote.
Oh, right.
Right. And so that vote even we're talking about, marching, being politically active, having, giving voice to different people groups. These are all things that maybe we don't necessarily see in Paul in particular or Jesus. They're always talking about the context of the church, and it's, and Paul, even in Thessalonians, in his famous, verse to say, live a quiet life, he's asking you not to call attention to this new kind of community that's birthing, because I think Paul really wants it to be established so that it has some momentum behind it before it kind of gets torn apart by the Roman Empire. I don't know what you think about that. Like, how do we look to Jesus? Because liberation theology looks to Jesus, looks to Paul to tell them how to act, and they read it very differently than we do. And it's always I've struggled to like bring forward the way Jesus and Paul involve themselves. So the way God invites us to act with power. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
Well, and this comes from my engagement in a very specific way of thinking about this years back. It seems like the resistance model of, let's say, of Jesus when he says, if somebody
strikes you on one cheek,
on the right, turn to them the left. Or did I reverse that?
Okay.
But, and then, somebody asks you to walk 1 mile, go 2. If they ask for your tunic, give them your cloak.
Give Caesar what is Caesar's, Jesus. God's what's God's. That's another.
Except that's that. There's that. But, in those 3 situations, the way that, and I have dug into this, and I actually do think this has a lot of validity and could give us a bit of a model. So to be struck on the left cheek would be to be struck as an equal. To be struck on the right cheek would be to be backhanded.
Yes. To
be treated like a slave. And so if somebody treats you like a slave, force them to treat you as an equal. If somebody, the Second Mile, we have a church here in town called Second Mile. Kind of the idea behind their name is like, go the distance, help people more than.
But comes from a Roman idea.
But the Second Mile was that the Roman officer was required to, or could require you to serve him by walking 1 mile.
Right, with his stuff. Yeah.
The Second Mile would have been you refusing to give him back his stuff and making him violate Rome's law. He would have begged you to stop, because this is now like he could get in trouble for this. It's an exposure. It's making him. It's because he's just doing a lawful thing by making you walk the 1 mile. If you walk the second, you're causing him to look bad, right? The cloak and the tunic, it's the outer garment and the inner garment. It's the underwear. It's imagine, somebody with a big overcoat and then a pair of long johns and nothing else on. So they demand of you your cloak. Give them your tunic. It's take off all your clothes. Now, in that culture, in our culture, that would be weird. If somebody if some, punk came up to you on the street and said, "Hey, give me that jacket," and you took off all your clothes.
Yeah, that would be strange.
It would be strange. But in that culture, it went beyond strange to, it was like you've humiliated them. You've put them to shame. Like I said, I really do think I don't think that in doing that, because that is what Jesus, did on the cross. He shamed the powers. He hung naked, before they had to behold him and what they had done. He didn't just go, "Oh, well, just kill me if that's what it takes." Like in his death on the cross, he did put to shame those who crucified the righteous one.
Sure.
And so I do think that there is a Christ-like way to take action that it should make people feel uncomfortable and see their shame. But it always costs the one who does the action greatly, or it's at great risk. And I'm not saying this because I have done this so well, but I do think that's a model that could actually be followed.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful model. I'd have to.
There are a lot of questions. What does that look like in a given situation?
To even dig into that historically to see if I would agree with you.
You should. I've spent some time on that.
No, and I trust you on that.
I mean, it's there are theologians who teach it, and I think there are others who would, but are afraid of what that would mean politically.
Sure.
But yeah, dig in, all of you. Go look it up. Really dig into the meaning of that and see if that's got some validity. It seems the hand with which you struck people was your right hand in that culture, and so to like kind of backhand somebody, you hit them on the right cheek. If you hit them on the left, you had to give them a solid, like the strike of an actual contender. Right. And the second mile was not something that anybody wanted you to walk with them. It was making somebody now violate their law, and the cloak and the tunic, one's taking you down to your
right, and that's
to nothing.
That's a hard one to get around.
Yeah,
I mean that one in particular. I would tend to probably agree with you that those are probably true things. I haven't studied that enough. The one thing that's interesting, I know this is off to the side, is I find it weird. I mean, I grew up in the church, and people spend a lot of time telling me about what the historical things are.
Yeah.
But the more I have done research and read historians, the reality is, and I really don't want to swear on the podcast, so I can't because then I have to click a button. It's saying that there's profanity, but it's a crap-filled world where you're trying to survive, and sometimes we make all these cultural structures about how it looked in the first century when Jesus was toting around. A lot of that wasn't going on because
sure, like flash forward 2,000 years from now and tell us about how people did things today.
Yes,
like which person?
Yeah, which person? Yeah, so I understand.
I know
Jesus is laying out a teaching, and he's talking to people who do have the time to process these things. Right. He's talking to religious rulers. He's not actually talking to the poor fisherman he's not even thinking about his right and left cheek, other than, it itches.
Right. It doesn't. Yeah. Right.
I think sometimes I totally agree with you. I just think sometimes people think, this is a particular, that is his dialogue to power.
Yeah.
Like
it is.
And that is the interesting concept there is he's talking to people who are in power and making them uncomfortable to think about these things.
And the theologian Walter Wink is the one who wrote that.
I love Walter Wink.
So he really unpacks this in Jesus' third way. And so he's getting at the idea that it's you can violently resist or you can passively,
sure,
just peacefully, but this is somewhere in between. It's not violence, but it isn't passive.
Right. It's interesting. It's interesting to me that you read Wink. I wouldn't have put him in there. I like his book on powers. I mean, that's where I get a lot of my theology of power from. It's Walter Wink. But I haven't actually read The Third Way.
Look at that, man. I've read a book you haven't read.
Oh, I'm pretty sure you've read a lot of books I haven't read. But I just haven't. I've only read one of his books. But
yeah. There you go.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great place to end. And really, I think that's something we should all think about. And actually, I would love to do another podcast on that with you. And
sure.
To process maybe a little bit more of Wink's theology of that and how it might look practically for you and I to participate in and be part of.
Yeah, and I'm interested in Wink, but I'm more like if he's like.
Not when he winks at us.
Yeah, but more like if he's right on that issue, which
I think he is.
I've milled that over many times since having read that, and I keep coming, and I've milled it over. I've researched it, and I keep going. I think he was right, and I don't feel the need to be like any more than I feel the need to be called a Calvinist or anything else. I don't need to be a
winkish,
a Winkian or whatever,
a winker.
But I think we should really take that reading seriously, look into it, and if it's true, it could really give us a model for engagement. Not an easy one.
Wow,
not an easy one.
Well, I'm really happy with the way this ended. I think that was really good.
All right. Well, thanks for hanging out.
Cool. I think you have to introduce because I introduced last week.